You're smart and successful, and yet still you feel like an imposter. Here's why. Let me tell you a story. I spent roughly 15 years training to become a scientist. And my goal wasn't just to be a scientist, it was to become a masterful scientist. And what that meant was that I would dedicate most of my life, 10 to 12 hours a day, doing research experiments for well over a decade. And what was driving me was foundationally a belief that I wasn't enough. And what that led me to do was to develop this persona of wanting to prove and defend to others, to the world, that I was worthy. I was, in fact, enough. And the way I did that was through putting on this facade of being intelligent, intellectually superior, and making others subconsciously feel inferior so that I could finally feel good about myself. And what I discovered has been that neither of those two identities were true. The part of me that felt like I wasn't enough wasn't true, and the part of me that felt like I had to compensate, overcompensate for that was also not real. It wasn't true. And at the heart of this was realizing and becoming really interested in what I meant by I, quote unquote, when I said I am not enough. What did the I actually mean? Who is that I that I'm referring to? And what I realized was that that I is itself a thought. I was believing myself to be a thought that said it wasn't enough, and I believed myself to be that thought, and therefore the I that I was referring to became myself. And this was really earth shattering to say the least. I realized that the thinker that is thinking is itself the thought. And the thought in general is so close to us. It's so personal, or can be so personal if we put the pronoun I into it, that we can very easily confuse the thought for who we imagine ourselves to be. And if this is true for you, if you feel like it's never enough for you, if you feel like no matter what you do, you're always falling short, well, consider investigating in your direct experience right now. Who is the I that says, I am not enough? And then you might consider asking yourself, who is it that is aware of the thought that says, I am not enough? Because whatever is aware of that thought is not itself a thought. Thought isn't aware of anything. It's a thought is simply a thought. In fact, the Hebrew word for thought, if I'm not mistaken, is dabar, which means matter. So thoughts are like objects. And it's worthwhile understanding and learning more about awareness itself. Because the one thing that's constant throughout our whole experience throughout life is the reality that we are aware of it. And whenever we pay attention to something, that word attention, the Latin root of that word is ad tendere, which means to stretch. So when we're paying attention, what's happening is that we are stretching awareness to, let's say, a car that we're looking at in front of us, or a person walking by, or a tree. Attention, is the stretching of awareness to that object. And I'll invite you to consider that the same thing happens with our thoughts. A thought arises in our experience, I am not enough, for instance, and without realizing it, awareness stretches toward that thought and becomes intertwined with it. And we then mistake ourselves to be that thought because there's no separation between the awareness of the thought and the thought. And when you relax awareness back, when you divest awareness of all of the contents of experience, seeing, thinking, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, you begin to realize that awareness itself is who you essentially are, and there's nothing that can really disturb it unless you give yourself permission to be disturbed by something in the world. It really speaks to this saying from Jesus, wherein he says, be in the world, but not of the world. This is exactly what that is. It's an invitation to be highly involved with your goals, your pursuits, your vision for your life, and yet totally detached from it, realizing that the awareness with which you are knowing this experience is not itself located in this experience. It might be intimately one with the experience you're having of sight, sound, smells, tastes, of thinking itself, but it's totally divested and independent from it, you might say. It's kind of like the same relationship a movie has to the screen the movie appears in. There's nothing to the movie besides the screen. In fact, the screen is a modulation of the movie itself. And yet, no matter what happens in the movie, no matter, let's say you're watching Lord of the Rings, Frodo is taking the ring to the mountain and throwing it in the fire. Uh, the whole movie, the whole trilogy is playing out. And no matter what happens to Frodo in the movie, or any of the characters in the movie, the screen in which the movie appears in is itself totally free of the destiny of the characters. The screen isn't hurt by anything that happens in Mount Doom. It isn't hurt by any of the monsters of the orcs or any of the other monsters that appear. The screen is totally free, totally independent of what happens in the actual movie, of what takes place in the movie. And I'll offer for your consideration that the same is true about the relationship between awareness and what happens within awareness. Thinking happens in awareness, perceiving happens in awareness, perceiving of the world, seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, they're the faculties through which we perceive. No matter what happens to the characters, to our body minds, the awareness that knows this experience is itself like the screen in which the movie appears in. And that I'll offer is actual freedom. That is true, lasting, liberating freedom. That no matter what is taking place in the movie of your life, you, awareness, are fundamentally separate from it, and yet paradoxically one with it. So I know this kind of took a bit of a left turn from the initial title, but I just offered you this for your own consideration and exploration. And again, realize, ask yourself questions to see if the one that thinks the thought, I am not enough, is actually You, or the thought itself, is the one who you're believing yourself to be. Because without those thoughts, without what you're thinking and believing, what's the problem? If any of this resonates with you, let me know in the comments.